Indiana, a name whispered across centuries, and a land whose very name evokes the memory of its first people, land of the Indians. At the heart of the American Midwest, Indiana stands where history meets the unknown, bordering Lake Michigan to the north, brushing against Kentucky to the south, and cradled by Michigan, Ohio, and Illinois. It may rank only 38th in size among the U.S. states, but its place in the shadows of American history is far from small. On December 11th, 1816, Indiana stepped into the light, becoming the 19th state of the Union. And since 1825, its pulse has echoed from its capital, Indianapolis. But Indiana's true story lies deeper, buried beneath fields, rivers, and ancient mounds. Prehistory and exploration. Long before settlers carved paths across its plains, the land we now call Indiana held secrets, ancient secrets, still only partially uncovered. Beneath the soil, near the Ohio River by modern-day Evansville, Angel Mounds reveals haunting remnants of a forgotten civilization. Here, archaeologists unearth traces of Indiana's earliest inhabitants, peoples who vanished long before written memory. By the early 1600s, the land stirred with the footsteps of the Algonquin-speaking tribes, foremost among them, the Miami Confederation. Their unity was born of necessity, facing the relentless advance of the Iroquois, whose dominance was both feared and respected. The Miami, including the Wee and Piankashaw, stood as guardians of their homeland. Alongside them, the Potawatomi emerged as a powerful force. Then came the Delaware, drifting west into the White River region, driven from their eastern homelands by European encroachment and Iroquois pressure. But it wasn't just the native peoples who left their mark on Indiana's hidden past. In 1679, the French explorer Robert Cavelier, Sieur de La Salle, entered the scene, navigating the St. Joseph River into the dark, uncharted wilds of northern Indiana. To the south, traders from the Carolinas and Pennsylvania arrived along the Ohio and Wabash rivers, each settlement a growing threat to French dominion over these vital trade arteries, links that connected Canada to Louisiana, threading through the heart of the continent. To hold their claim, the French built forts, each one a silent sentinel in the wilderness. Fort Miami, 1704, near today's Fort Wayne. Fort Huiatanon, 1719, in the shadow of present-day Lafayette. Fort Vincennes, 1732, one of the first enduring white settlements west of the Appalachians. These forts were more than military posts. They were footholds in a contested land, silent witnesses to a centuries-long struggle for control, survival, and identity. Indiana's history is not just etched in textbooks. It's carved into the earth, whispered by rivers, and cloaked in mystery. This is not just the story of a state. It is a portal into the forgotten, the ancient, and the untamed past of America itself. Stay with us as we journey deeper into the hidden history of Indiana, where every name, every river, and every ruin tells a story waiting to be unearthed. Shadows of empire and resistance. By 1763, a new empire cast its shadow over Indiana. In the wake of the French and Indian War, the land was ceded to England, a silent exchange sealed by distant treaties, with little regard for the lives already rooted in the soil. The British, wary of frontier conflict, issued a command from afar: no more white settlement. But the frontier did not obey. The edict was ignored. Settlers came anyway, quietly, steadily, defiantly. Then, in 1774, the British Parliament made a bold move, annexing this contested land into Quebec, stirring resentment among the colonies already straining under imperial rule. When the fires of the American Revolution ignited in 1775, Indiana's fate turned once more. Virginia, Connecticut, and Massachusetts each laid claim to the region, hungry for land and leverage. And in 1779, a daring strike would change everything. George Rogers Clark, moving under the cloak of winter and war, led his men on a treacherous march through frozen wilderness, from Kaskaskia to Vincennes. The march was brutal, the odds long. But the prize was great. Clark's surprise attack seized the area from British control, securing it for the rebelling colonies and forever altering Indiana's destiny into the territorial unknown. With the war ended in 1783, the treaties of Paris handed this land, stretching from Pennsylvania to the Mississippi and from the Ohio River to the Great Lakes, to the newborn United States. The frontier, once distant and foreign, now belonged to a fragile new republic. By 1784, the first official U.S. settlement took root, Clarksville, perched on the northern bank of the Ohio River. But something larger was taking shape. In 1787, the Ordinance of the Northwest Territory brought order to the chaos. Indiana became part of a vast expanse, a legal construct forged to tame the frontier. It outlawed future slavery, yet turned a blind eye to the chains that already existed. By 1800, there were still 175 slaves in the territory, ghosts of an old system lingering in a land preparing for something new. But peace was fleeting. The forests and fields of Indiana became battlegrounds once more, as indigenous resistance surged against the waves of incoming settlers. Then, in 1794, near a place called Fallen Timbers, U.S. forces led by General Anthony Wayne crushed the last organized native military resistance in the region, forcing painful land concessions. Still, the conflict had not yet burned out. The last stand of native sovereignty. After 1800, the migration quickened. White settlers, many from the southern states, poured into Indiana's open lands. Tensions rose. Tribes that had lived there for generations began organizing one last stand. In 1811, near the banks of the Wabash River, in the shadow of what is now Lafayette, destiny collided at the Battle of Tippecanoe. Led by General William Henry Harrison, U.S. forces clashed with a coalition of native warriors. The battle was fierce, the outcome decisive. With that final defeat, organized indigenous resistance crumbled. The road to statehood was now clear. In 1816, Indiana became the 19th state of the Union. Its first capital, Corydon, stood as a symbol of new governance, rising from the ashes of conquest and resistance. Over the next 25 years, one by one, the native tribes abandoned their ancestral lands, driven by broken treaties, westward pressure, and the unrelenting march of expansion. But their stories were never truly erased, only buried, waiting in the soil, echoing in forgotten names and silent places. Indiana's history is more than a timeline. It's a tale of empires clashing, of secret marches through hostile winter, of cultures erased and others born anew. And the land remembers. Statehood and the quiet foundations of power. As the 19th century unfolded, Indiana, still young, still raw, began to take shape in the quiet spaces between rivers and roads, farms and fields. From south to north, settlers carved out a new way of life, one built on local autonomy, rural rhythms, and a fierce sense of independence. These weren't cities yet, just scattered communities rising from wilderness, each one writing its own rules. In the stillness of 1815, on the banks of the Wabash River, a curious dream took root: New Harmony. First established by George Rapp and later reimagined by the radical thinker Robert Owen in 1825, this utopian community dared to question the order of things. A society of shared wealth and common good. It didn't last, but the echoes of its idealism still stir in Indiana's story. Education soon followed vision. In 1801, the first college appeared in Vincennes, and by 1820, Indiana University was chartered, its name a promise of learning on a frontier that still felt wild. Then, in 1834, a single-car, horse-drawn railroad clattered into Shelbyville, pulling Indiana slowly toward the modern age. But even as towns grew and horizons widened, the state clung tightly to self-reliance. The Indiana Constitution of 1851, still the foundation of state governance, enshrined limits on debt and championed local power. It created a public school system, supported by taxes, and aimed to balance growth with caution. Yet not all clauses were just. Article 13, written in the shadow of national unrest, prohibited black people from entering the state. This dark mark in the document would remain until 1866, when a U.S. Supreme Court struck it down, declaring it a violation of the Civil Rights Act. From fields to factories, a transformation begins. In the mid to late 1800s, agriculture still ruled Indiana's heartland. But beneath the surface, iron and coal, fire and steel were preparing to overtake it. The American Civil War ignited a new era, one of smoke, machinery, and booming industry. By 1900, Indiana's northern corridor no longer resembled a farming frontier. It had become an industrial stronghold. And then came Gary. In 1906, the city of Gary rose seemingly overnight, a calculated creation forged by the steel industry. It sat like a keystone between three vast natural forces: the iron ore of Minnesota's Mesabi Range, the coal fields of the Central Appalachians, and the limestone quarries of southern Indiana and Illinois. It wasn't a town that grew. It was a machine built to build machines. Not far away, in South Bend, the humming of assembly lines signaled the arrival of automobile manufacturing, further sealing Indiana's fate as a pillar of American industry. The past that would not let go. But while cities modernized and economies shifted, the spirit of the 1851 Constitution lingered, like a distant voice in a changing room. Its roots ran deep into Indiana's political soil: isolation, independence, and a distrust of centralized power. These values made sense in an era when villages were days apart, when travel was by wagon, not train, and certainly not airplane. So strong was this legacy that, even as roads stretched, telegraphs buzzed, and cars replaced horses, the Indiana legislature continued to meet only every other year, as if time had stopped. It wasn't until 1970 that the state finally approved annual legislative sessions. This wasn't mere habit. It was resistance, a deliberate holding on, to tradition, to locality, to something older than modern convenience. To understand Indiana history, we must look past the names and dates. We must listen for the silence beneath its laws, the steel beneath its soil, the ghost towns and failed utopias, the railroads that whispered into empty fields before cities ever came. Indiana is not just a place. It is an idea formed in resistance, hardened in conflict, and carried forward by quiet resolve. The journey continues. A new chapter, a familiar struggle. As the 20th century waned, Indiana, long defined by its soil, steel, and stubborn independence, began to shift once more. In the late 1980s, change surged through the state, political and economic alike, like a tide that would not be stopped. From the quiet streets of Huntington, a native Hoosier stepped onto the world stage. Dan Quayle, a Republican, was elected Vice President of the United States in 1988, serving beside George H. W. Bush. Yet, even as national power tilted red, Indiana's own governorship turned blue. For 16 years, the Democratic Party held sway, until 2005, when Republicans reclaimed the post once again. But beyond the ballot boxes, a different revolution was unfolding: economic, expansive, and relentless. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, Indiana's economy surged. The state held tightly to its crown as America's leading producer of steel. Its industries hummed not just for the homeland, but for the world, exports to Canada and Mexico climbing steadily, a quiet network of trade stretching from factories in the north to foreign docks far beyond. And with prosperity came sprawl. Around the edges of Indianapolis and other growing cities, new subdivisions bloomed like concrete crops, suburban kingdoms rising where once stood cornfields. Urban centers, too, began to reinvent themselves. Indianapolis's core, once weary and gray, pulsed with renewed ambition. Shopping complexes, towering offices, modern universities, and sports arenas reshaped the skyline. In a bold move, a major stadium was torn down, not in decay, but in preparation. In its place rose a gleaming new convention center, and by 2008, a new professional sports stadium stood tall, an icon of Indiana's march into the 21st century. Yet beneath the steel and stadium lights, beneath the bustling suburbs and export graphs, Indiana's past still lingers, in old bricks, buried mounds, and the silent spaces where indigenous songs once echoed. This is Indiana, a land of contradictions and transformations, where rural tradition dances with global commerce, where ghosts of the past walk beside the futures we build. The story doesn't end here. If you've made it this far, you've felt it too. That strange hum beneath Indiana's history. The forgotten voices, the unseen forces, the silent moments that shaped a nation. Want more stories like this? Hit subscribe to History Love and join us as we uncover the hidden histories behind every state, war, revolution, and forgotten face. Tap the bell so you never miss the next mystery waiting to be told. And if you believe history is more than just facts, if you believe it's alive, then History Love is where you belong. This is not the end. This is just Indiana. And Indiana is only the beginning.